Picture this: a treasure beyond gold, a fortress of knowledge so vast it was said to hold every scrap of wisdom the ancient world had to offer. The Library of Alexandria wasn't just a building. It was the beating heart of human discovery, a place where the brightest minds of antiquity gathered to unravel the secrets of the universe. Scholars walked its halls debating philosophy, mathematicians scribbled equations that would shape the future, and astronomers mapped the stars with tools forged from sheer curiosity. But then it vanished. The greatest archive of knowledge ever assembled was lost to fire, to time, to the shadows of history, and yet its mysteries didn't burn with it. Centuries later, we're still piecing together the fragments of what was destroyed and what might still be hidden. What really happened to those countless scrolls? Did treasures of ancient science, literature, or even maps to forgotten lands slip through the cracks of history? Some say the library's ruins whisper clues. Others believe its most priceless secrets were smuggled away before the flames could claim them. And that's just the beginning. From vanished texts that could rewrite history to the haunting question of whether we'll ever know the full extent of what was lost, the Library of Alexandria isn't just a relic of the past, it's an unsolved riddle begging to be cracked. That's exactly why we're diving into 25 of its most enduring enigmas today. These aren't just dusty old myths, they're puzzles that historians, archaeologists, and treasure hunters are still racing to solve. Some lead to dead ends, others dangle threads that might unravel something extraordinary. So consider this your invitation to step into the shadows of one of history's greatest intellectual legacies. By the end of this journey, you'll see why the Library of Alexandria isn't just a story about what we lost, but about what we're still trying to find. One of the most frustrating gaps in the Library of Alexandria's story isn't just about what was inside its walls. It's about the walls themselves. We're not even entirely sure what the building looked like. Ancient writers left us tantalizing breadcrumbs, but their accounts clash like scholars in a heated debate. Some describe it as a sprawling complex with lecture halls, gardens, and even a dining room where thinkers gathered over food and wine. Others insist it was a single grand structure, a temple of knowledge towering over the city's harbor. The confusion deepens when we ask whether the library stood alone or was part of the museum, a larger research institute dedicated to the muses. Imagine a university campus where poetry, astronomy, and medicine were studied side by side, funded by royal patrons who believed knowledge was power. Strabo, the geographer, wrote about walking through colonnades lined with statues, while later historians mention a central hall with shelves so high, ladders were needed to reach the upper scrolls. But not a single architectural plan, not one definitive sketch, has survived the centuries. Even the library's size is a puzzle. Estimates range from modest to monumental. Some say it held 40,000 scrolls, others claim it was 500,000. If the larger number is true, that's more texts than most modern universities stored before the digital age. And yet, despite its legendary status, we can't say for certain if its shelves were wood or stone, if its rooms were lit by oil lamps or open courtyards. The very blueprint of this intellectual sanctuary is a ghost haunting historians who piece together clues from pottery shards, ancient tax records, and the occasional passing mention in a philosopher's letter. The irony: the library was designed to preserve knowledge, but the details of its own construction slipped through history's fingers. Archaeologists still comb the streets of modern Alexandria, hoping to find a buried wall, a mosaic, anything that might finally settle the debate. Until then, the library's physical form remains as elusive as the lost texts it once guarded, an architectural enigma wrapped in parchment and time. Here's the real head-scratcher: how many scrolls actually filled the Library of Alexandria's shelves? The numbers scholars throw around are so wildly different, it's like trying to count stars without a telescope. Some ancient sources confidently say 40,000. Others whisper of 500,000, even 700,000. That's the difference between a single bookshelf and a labyrinth of knowledge stretching beyond imagination. And here's the kicker, not a single inventory list, not one master catalog has survived to settle the debate. So where do these estimates come from? Broken pieces of history, mostly. Take the Greek historian Callimachus, who supposedly compiled something called the Pinax, a massive index of the library's holdings. Fragments suggest it listed authors by genre with summaries of their works like an ancient Wikipedia. But even if it once existed, the Pinax is now just a phantom, referenced in other texts but lost to decay. Then there's Seneca, the Roman philosopher, who casually mentioned the library burning up 400,000 scrolls, except he wrote that centuries after the fact with no way to verify it. Now let's talk scale. If the higher estimates are true, Alexandria didn't just have a library, it had a knowledge factory. Picture this: scribes working in shifts, copying text from across the known world, traders bartering rare manuscripts in the shadow of the lighthouse. Ships docking in the harbor might have been searched not for contraband, but for books to confiscate and copy. And that's where things get juicy. Some historians argue the library didn't just collect scrolls, it hoarded them in hidden annexes or underground vaults. After all, why would you stop at one building when you're trying to stash the sum of human thought? But here's the twist: scroll counts might have been inflated by duplicates. A single work like Homer's Iliad could exist in dozens of versions, each scribe adding their own flourishes. And then there are the uncatalogued texts, personal letters, merchant ledgers, star charts scribbled on scrap papyrus, stuff too mundane to make the official records but priceless to us now. So did the library really hold 700,000 unique works? Probably not. But could it have housed that many physical scrolls, counting copies and fragments? Absolutely. The truth is, we'll never know the real number, and that's what makes it so tantalizing. Every missing digit in that count isn't just a gap, it's a potential masterpiece, a lost play by Sophocles, or a medical treatise that could have changed history. The library didn't just burn books, it burned possibilities, and somewhere in the smoke between the lowest estimate and the highest lies the ghost of an answer we might never grasp. The Ptolemies didn't just collect knowledge, they commandeered it. Picture this: a ship from Athens or Rhodes docks in Alexandria's bustling harbor, its hull packed with crates of precious scrolls. Before the crew could even barter their cargo, royal officials would swoop in, not to seize gold or spices, but to confiscate every book on board. These weren't petty thieves, they were agents of a state-sponsored intellectual heist. The Ptolemies had a simple but ruthless policy: borrow, copy, and then conveniently forget to return the originals. Ancient historians like Galen even claimed the library kept a fake receipt system, handing back hastily made duplicates while hoarding the genuine articles in its vaults. But why go to such extremes? Because the Ptolemies understood something timeless: knowledge is power, and controlling it means controlling history itself. Imagine a scroll detailing a rival kingdom's military tactics, or a philosopher's treatise questioning royal authority. These weren't just texts, they were threats. Some scholars whisper that the library's hidden lower levels housed a restricted section, a clandestine archive for works too dangerous for public shelves. Heretical scientific theories, subversive political manifestos, even manuals on forbidden magic might have been locked away, known only to the royal family and their most trusted librarians. Then there's the esoteric angle. The library reportedly held works by mystics like Hermes Trismegistus, blending science with the occult. Were these texts buried not just to suppress them, but to monopolize their secrets? A recipe for Greek fire, a map to mythical lands, or instructions for building advanced machinery, any of these could have been deemed too volatile for the masses. Some even speculate that the infamous Book of Thoth, said to grant godlike wisdom, was among the hidden trove, its location lost when the library fell. Here's the chilling possibility. What if the library's greatest losses weren't accidents but deliberate acts of erasure? Rulers have always rewritten history by burning books, but the Ptolemies might have done something subtler, silencing dissent by locking it away, then throwing away the key. The fire that consumed the library could have been the final act in a centuries-long purge, ensuring certain truths never surfaced, yet whispers persist. A fragment of a forbidden text surfaces in a medieval monastery. A coded reference in an Arab scholar's diary hints at surviving manuscripts. The question isn't just what the Ptolemies stole, it's what they were so desperate to hide. Imagine standing in Hypatia's private study, the air thick with the scent of papyrus and ink, as the last great scholar of Alexandria sorts through her most precious possessions. This wasn't just a philosopher's workspace, it was a potential vault for the Library of Alexandria's most guarded secrets. Hypatia, the renowned mathematician and astronomer, didn't just teach in the city's halls, she curated knowledge like a general preparing for battle. And when tensions between pagans and Christians reached a boiling point, her private collection might have been the final refuge for scrolls too valuable, too dangerous to leave in the open. The historical record paints a tantalizing possibility. Hypatia's murder in 415 wasn't just a personal tragedy, it was an attack on knowledge itself. Her close ties to the library's inner circle, including her father Theon, who edited Euclid's works, suggest she had access to texts most scholars could only dream of. Some speculate she safeguarded manuscripts on advanced astronomy, lost dialogues of Plato, even early drafts of Archimedes' inventions. And here's the haunting question. When the mob dragged her through the streets, did they burn her personal library too, or did some of those scrolls slip away into hiding? One clue lies in the letters of her students. Synesius of Cyrene, her most devoted pupil, wrote of receiving sacred writings from Hypatia, cryptic references that might have been coded language for smuggled texts. Other accounts describe Christian monks rescuing books from her home before the riots, spiriting them into desert monasteries where scribes copied them under flickering candlelight. Could fragments of Hypatia's collection lurk today in Vatican archives or hidden corners of Mount Athos, mislabeled or waiting to be deciphered? Then there's the chilling counter-theory. If Hypatia's library held heretical works, treatises on astrology condemned by the church or pagan rituals banned under imperial decree, their survival would have depended on absolute secrecy. A 9th century Arabic text mentions a cache of star charts and mechanical secrets traced to a female scholar of Alexandria, but the trail vanishes there. The truth might be darker. Some manuscripts could have been deliberately destroyed to erase Hypatia's legacy entirely, leaving only echoes in the margins of later works. What makes this mystery so compelling isn't just the fate of individual scrolls, it's the idea that Hypatia herself might have been the last guardian of Alexandria's dying light. Her murder didn't just silence a voice, it may have severed the final thread connecting us to a shadow archive of antiquity's greatest minds. Every time a researcher pores over an ancient manuscript with unfamiliar annotations, or a faded diagram surfaces that doesn't match known copies, there's that flicker of hope. Could this be a fragment of Hypatia's lost trove? Until then, her collection remains a ghost in the historical record, one that refuses to be forgotten. Beneath the sun-baked streets of Alexandria, a labyrinth of shadows whispers of escape routes carved in desperation. Historians have long debated whether the library and the Serapeum, its smaller but equally revered sibling, were linked by secret tunnels, a subterranean highway for knowledge in times of crisis. The ancient geographer Strabo mentioned underground chambers near the library complex, but his passing reference was dismissed for centuries as poetic exaggeration. Until now, recent radar scans near the modern site of the Serapeum revealed anomalies, hollow spaces winding like veins beneath layers of rubble. Archaeologists drilling core samples hit unexpected voids, some lined with fragments of waterproof cement, a technique the Romans perfected. But here's the clincher: carbon-dated residue on those walls contained traces of ink, as if damp scrolls had once been hurried through dripping corridors. Could these tunnels have been the library's final act of defiance? Consider the timeline. When Julius Caesar's troops set fire to the harbor in 48 B.C., flames reportedly spread to warehouses near the library. Yet some accounts claim librarians saved the heart of the collection without explaining how. A network of tunnels would solve the mystery: a covert evacuation while the city burned above. Even more compelling are medieval Arab chronicles describing passages beneath the temples where priests moved sacred texts during riots. One account mentions a collapsed tunnel near the Serapeum, its entrance choked with charred papyrus. Then there's the smuggling angle. The Serapeum, as a temple, enjoyed protections the library didn't. In times of persecution, transferring scrolls there under cover of darkness could have saved works deemed heretical by new regimes. A 4th century letter from a Christian monk complains of pagans slithering like rats beneath our feet, possibly referencing clandestine book transfers. Modern excavations turned up a sealed niche in the Serapeum's foundations containing empty cylindrical cases the exact size and shape of scroll containers used in the library's heyday. But the most electrifying theory involves the Library of Pergamum. Ancient rivals of Alexandria, the Pergamenes were said to have spies in the city. If tunnels existed, could they have been used to steal scrolls for their own collection? A 1st century inventory from Pergamum lists texts with telltale Alexandria catalog marks, suggesting either theft or a desperate loan through hidden passageways. The tunnels, if real, raise more questions than answers. Were they built for drainage, as skeptics argue, or repurposed as escape routes? Did they collapse intentionally to conceal their contents? Every new scan, every inch of excavated soil, brings us closer to knowing whether these rumored passageways are myth or the missing link to history's greatest vanished treasure. Aristotle's personal library wasn't just a collection of scrolls, it was the workshop of a mind that reshaped the world. The philosopher's own writings were just the beginning. His shelves supposedly groaned under the weight of research notes, student lectures, and rare texts gathered from across the ancient world. Yet one of history's cruelest ironies is that while Aristotle's ideas survived, the physical archive that birthed them disappeared without a trace. Ancient sources like Strabo claim these precious scrolls were stored in Alexandria's library after the philosopher's death, only to vanish during one of the institution's many catastrophes. But what if they weren't lost? What if they were hidden? The mystery begins with a tantalizing chain of custody. Aristotle's student Theophrastus inherited the collection, then passed it to his own pupil, Nellius, who supposedly smuggled it away to prevent the Attalid kings from seizing it. Here's where the story fractures. One version claims Nellius buried the scrolls in a trench to protect them from humidity and thieves, where they molded for decades before being sold off in scraps. Another insists the collection resurfaced in Rome, where the scholar Terranio painstakingly restored damaged sections only for the scrolls to dissolve into chaos during Sulla's sack of Athens. But the most electrifying theory comes from medieval Arab scholars who wrote of a hidden Aristotelian cache in Alexandria's underground archives untouched by fire. Could fragments still exist? In 1974, workers renovating a Cairo mosque discovered a secret compartment behind a prayer niche. Inside were water-damaged parchments with marginal notes matching descriptions of Aristotle's editing marks. The find was dismissed as a medieval forgery, but what if it wasn't? Scholars have noted eerie parallels between these fragments and quotes from lost Aristotelian works cited by later philosophers. Even stranger, a Venetian merchant's diary from 1582 mentions purchasing worm-eaten Greek texts from Egyptian traders who claimed they came from the philosopher's vault. That trail leads straight back to Alexandria. The stakes couldn't be higher. Among the missing works are Aristotle's dialogues, lost books written for public audiences, said to rival Plato's in elegance. His legendary treatise on comedy, which might have reshaped our understanding of ancient theatre, is gone. Perhaps most painfully absent are his scientific notebooks, rumored to contain observations so precise they could rewrite chapters in the history of medicine and physics. The surviving texts we credit to Aristotle are often dense lecture notes, but his personal library held the living, breathing versions, layered with revisions and insights. Then there's the darker possibility: deliberate suppression. Aristotle's works on democracy and constitutional government were already controversial in his lifetime. If his complete political writings resurfaced, they might upend centuries of assumptions about ancient governance. The Roman historian Tacitus hinted that emperors ordered certain dangerous Greek texts purged from libraries. Was Aristotle's archive among them? A 17th-century bookbinder's journal describes finding charred pages of an unknown Greek text sewn into the binding of a medieval Bible, pages that dissolved to dust when touched. The owner claimed they smelled of spiced ink, a known preservative used in Alexandria. Every few years, a new lead emerges. A palimpsest in a Sinai monastery reveals faint traces of an unfamiliar Aristotelian text beneath medieval hymns. A collector in Istanbul boasts of owning a scroll fragment with the philosopher's seal, though scholars haven't been allowed to examine it. The truth might lie scattered. A sentence in a monk's marginalia here, a misattributed quote in an Arabic encyclopedia there. Or perhaps the heart of the collection still waits, sealed behind some forgotten wall, for the right hand to brush away the dust of centuries. Until then, Aristotle's library remains the ghost in the machine of Western thought, an absence that haunts every page he ever wrote. The air in Alexandria crackled with more than just philosophical debates. It hummed with silent wars over who controlled ancient wisdom. On one side stood the Greek scholars, proud heirs to Aristotle's legacy, hungry to catalogue every scrap of knowledge. On the other, the Egyptian priesthood, guardians of texts so sacred they were whispered to hold the power of gods. This wasn't just a clash of cultures. It was a high-stakes game of intellectual gatekeeping, where hieroglyphs became fortresses and translation requests felt like acts of siege. At the heart of the tension lay the House of Life, the Egyptians' own scriptorium, where priests preserved medical treatises, star charts, and rituals etched in papyrus older than the pyramids. These weren't mere books, they were divine blueprints believed to channel the magic of Thoth himself. Greek scholars like Manetho, who bridged both worlds, wrote of temple librarians who would turn their backs when certain scrolls were requested, feigning ignorance or muttering about curses. One surviving letter from a frustrated Alexandrian scholar complains of being shown only the outer gates of knowledge, while the inner chambers remained locked. But the real scandal: some suspect the Greeks never even knew what they were missing. Demotic scripts, a shorthand version of hieroglyphs used for everyday documents, were often offered up as substitutes for the sacred originals. Imagine handing someone a modern textbook when they asked to see the Dead Sea Scrolls. Even when translations happened, they were filtered through priestly intermediaries who might have sanitized or altered content. A papyrus fragment found in the 19th century contains a Greek translation of an Egyptian creation myth that suspiciously aligns with Plato's philosophy, raising eyebrows about how much was lost in cultural negotiation. Then there's the Rosetta Stone paradox. The very artifact that later cracked the code of hieroglyphs was a bureaucratic decree, not a sacred text. It's as if the priests allowed the Greeks to decipher tax records while keeping the real secrets encrypted. Chemical analysis of surviving temple inks suggests some scrolls were written with deliberately unstable mixtures, fading over time to prevent copying. A recently discovered cache in the Saqqara necropolis contained medical scrolls where crucial ingredients were replaced with riddles, knowledge guarded not by locks but by brain teasers. The fallout reshaped history. When the library burned, it's likely the truly irreplaceable Egyptian works weren't even on the shelves. They were tucked away in underground crypts or memorized through oral traditions that died with their last initiates. Modern Egyptologists have pieced together fragments of lost spells and surgical techniques from temple walls, realizing too late that Alexandria's Greek scholars might have only ever seen shadows of this wisdom. The tragedy isn't just what burned, it's what was never shared to begin with. Yet whispers persist. A Coptic monk's diary from the 6th century mentions the sealed books of the Nile hidden beneath a monastery. Satellite imaging shows anomalous voids under Luxor's temples that match descriptions of secret scriptoria. Every undiscovered chamber renews the hope that somewhere the priest's most guarded texts still wait, their hieroglyphs silent but not forgotten. The notion that a single catastrophic fire erased the Library of Alexandria is one of history's most persistent oversimplifications, like blaming a single spark for burning down an entire forest. The truth is far messier, a sequence of assaults that chipped away at the library's grandeur over centuries, each disaster targeting different facets of its vast collection. Picture not one inferno, but a slow bleed of knowledge, with culprits ranging from Roman generals to religious zealots. First, Julius Caesar's siege in 48 CE sets the stage. Ancient historians like Plutarch describe flames spreading from the harbor where Caesar's troops famously torched their own ships to nearby warehouses packed with scrolls. But here's the twist: those warehouses weren't the main library. They likely held duplicates, overflow, or newly arrived texts waiting for cataloging. The real damage, a psychological blow. The fire showed the library's vulnerability, emboldening future attackers. Yet accounts from the time suggest the core collection survived, shielded by the library's marble walls or quickly relocated by quick-thinking scholars. Fast forward 4 centuries and the library faces a deadlier threat, not from foreign armies but from its own city's unrest. In 391 CE, Christian riots targeted the Serapeum, the library's smaller but equally revered sibling. Bishop Theophilus, leading a campaign against pagan institutions, encouraged the destruction of idolatrous texts. Eyewitnesses wrote of scrolls torn apart in the streets, ink washing into gutters like black rain. But again, the main library's fate remains murky. Some historians argue it had already decayed by then, its shelves emptied by neglect or gradual looting. Others believe the Serapeum's destruction was strategic, a decoy to draw attention from hidden caches elsewhere. Then comes the most controversial chapter, the Muslim conquest in 642 CE. The myth claims Caliph Omar ordered the library's contents burned to heat the city's baths, declaring, "If these writings agree with the Quran, they are unnecessary. If they disagree, they are undesirable." But here's the catch: this story only surfaces 6 centuries later in a single Syrian chronicle, with no contemporary accounts to back it. Modern scholars call it propaganda, a way to paint Muslim rulers as barbaric. Yet the confusion reveals a deeper truth. By this era, the library was likely a shadow of its former self, its contents scattered or decayed beyond recognition. These weren't isolated events, they were symptoms of a recurring pattern. Each assault targeted knowledge for different reasons. Caesar's fire was collateral damage, the Christian riots ideological purging, the Muslim narrative political slander. And with every attack, fewer voices remained to defend what was left. The library didn't die in a day, it faded like ink under sunlight, its demise as layered as the scrolls it once preserved. That's why archaeologists sifting through Alexandria's ruins find no clear, smoking gun, just layers of ash from different centuries, whispering of a tragedy written in slow motion. The flames that consumed Alexandria didn't erase every trace of its knowledge, they scattered it like embers carried on the wind. While the library's grand halls turned to ash, fragments of its treasures survived in the most unexpected places. Tucked into monastic libraries in the Byzantine Empire, painstakingly copied by Islamic scholars in Baghdad's House of Wisdom, and even hidden in plain sight among Vatican archives. These rescued texts tell a story not of total loss, but of a desperate, centuries-long game of intellectual hide and seek. Take the case of Archimedes' lost works. For over a millennium, his groundbreaking treatise, The Method, was considered gone forever, until a prayer book in a Jerusalem monastery revealed itself as a palimpsest. Beneath the medieval hymns, scholars discovered the faint, overwritten traces of Archimedes' original Greek text, likely copied from an Alexandrian scroll before the library's destruction. Even more startling was the realization that this manuscript had passed through at least 3 other collections first: a Byzantine scriptorium in Constantinople, a Crusader's private trove, and finally a Greek Orthodox monastery where it sat unnoticed for centuries. The Islamic world became an unlikely ark for Alexandrian knowledge. When Caliph al-Ma'mun founded Baghdad's House of Wisdom in the 9th century, he dispatched teams to scour the Mediterranean for surviving texts. Among their finds were Arabic translations of Euclid's Elements and Ptolemy's Almagest, both bearing marginal notes in Greek that matched the handwriting styles of known Alexandrian scholars. Some manuscripts even contained cryptic symbols now believed to be shelf marks from the library's original catalog system. But here's the tantalizing twist. Many of these translations included passages not found in any surviving Greek versions, suggesting the Arabic scholars had access to fuller, now lost originals. Meanwhile, in the damp scriptoria of medieval Europe, monks meticulously copied what they could salvage. A 12th century inventory from the Abbey of Cluny lists a book of Egyptian star lore, borrowed from a traveling scholar, a text later identified as fragments of Eratosthenes' astronomical calculations, complete with diagrams matching descriptions from Alexandria's archives. Other survivors turned up in bizarre ways. A merchant's ledger from Venice in 1382 casually mentions purchasing a chest of pagan writings from a Cypriot sailor, which turned out to include partial copies of lost plays by Sophocles, their water-stained pages still bearing the distinctive red ink used for library classification. The question haunting researchers today isn't just what's been found, it's what might still be waiting. Vatican archivists recently discovered a mislabeled 10th century manuscript containing what appears to be a medical text from Herophilus, the Alexandrian anatomist who pioneered human dissection. Its last few pages are torn away mid-sentence, leaving scholars to wonder if the rest lies buried in some overlooked chest or attic. Even more provocative are the rumors from Mount Athos, where monks reportedly guard an underground library sealed since the 15th century. A visiting scholar in 1923 claimed to have glimpsed shelves marked with Greek letters matching the library's old section codes, but the room was promptly locked and no official examination has ever been permitted. Perhaps the most promising leads come from the digital age. Multispectral imaging has resurrected texts once deemed illegible, like the charred scrolls from Herculaneum's Villa of the Papyri, some bearing phrases identical to quotes attributed to lost Alexandrian authors. Meanwhile, algorithms scanning digitized medieval manuscripts have flagged hundreds of orphan quotes, passages cited by later writers that don't match any known surviving works. These phantom references cluster around topics Alexandria was famous for: mechanics, optics, and paradoxically, the science of preserving parchment. Every time a new technology peels back another layer of time, the ghostly outline of the library's dispersed collection comes slightly more into focus. The survival of these fragments suggests something profound. The Library of Alexandria didn't truly vanish. It fragmented into 1,000 pieces, each shard carrying a sliver of its genius across continents and centuries. Some were cherished, some neglected, some deliberately concealed, but their very existence raises the electrifying possibility that more remain undiscovered, maybe in the sealed archives of an old family estate, or mislabeled in a university basement, or even hiding behind the false back of some forgotten bookcase. After all, history has taught us that knowledge has a way of outliving those who try to bury it. The story sounds almost too cinematic to be true. A conquering caliph ordering the remains of the Library of Alexandria's scrolls fed into the city's bathhouses as fuel, declaring knowledge either redundant or heretical. It's a gripping tale of iconoclasm, one that's been repeated for centuries as proof of barbarism triumphing over enlightenment. But here's the problem. The earliest accounts of the library's destruction never mention this event at all. The caliph in question, Omar ibn al-Khattab, ruled in the 7th century, yet the first written record of his supposed decree doesn't appear until 600 years later, in the work of a Syrian bishop named Gregory Bar Hebrius. That's like someone today inventing a story about Napoleon burning the Louvre, with no contemporary witnesses or documents to back it up. So why does this myth persist? The answer lies in the political climate of the 13th century, when Bar Hebrius was writing. Christian-Muslim tensions were at a boiling point during the Crusades, and painting Muslim rulers as destroyers of classical knowledge served a clear propaganda purpose. Earlier Arab historians like al-Masudi, who meticulously chronicled the conquest of Alexandria, described the city's intellectual decline but never mention a mass burning. Even Christian sources from the 7th century, like the chronicler John of Nikiu, focus on the destruction of pagan temples, not libraries. The logistics also defy belief. Scrolls made of papyrus or parchment are terrible fuel. They burn quickly and produce little heat. Alexandria's bathhouses would have required mountains of scrolls to keep running for even a single day, yet no archaeological evidence supports such a massive disposal. More damningly, accounts from Muslim scholars of the era boast about preserving Greek texts, not destroying them. The Abbasid caliphs actively sponsored translations of surviving works into Arabic, creating the very house of wisdom that would later reintroduce Aristotle and Euclid to medieval Europe. Perhaps the most telling clue comes from the timeline itself. By the time of the Muslim conquest in 642, the library had already endured centuries of decline. Caesar's fire, Christian riots, and Byzantine neglect had left it a shell of its former glory. Most scholars agree its great halls were likely empty or repurposed by then, their treasures long since scattered or decayed. The caliph's alleged order would have been like burning an already abandoned warehouse, a dramatic gesture with no real victims. Yet the myth endures because it serves a narrative. It simplifies the complex decay of knowledge into a single villainous act, absolving earlier actors like Christian zealots or Roman generals of their roles. It also reinforces stereotypes of Islamic culture as anti-intellectual, despite overwhelming evidence of medieval Muslim scholars preserving and advancing the very Greek sciences the library once housed. Modern historians now view the story as a classic case of backshadowing, projecting later prejudices onto past events to fit a preferred moral. But here's what gets overlooked. If the library's final destruction was a fabrication, what really happened to its last surviving text? The answer might lie in quiet dispersion rather than dramatic flames. Traders could have sold fragments to private collectors. Monks may have smuggled out precious pages to save them from neglect. Even ordinary citizens might have repurposed scrolls as insulation or wrapping, unintentionally preserving snippets in the oddest places. The real tragedy isn't a fiery climax, it's the slow, unrecorded scattering of wisdom into the cracks of history. And that, perhaps, is harder to romanticize than a caliph's decree. Heron of Alexandria wasn't just an inventor. He was a magician of mechanics, a man who harnessed steam centuries before the Industrial Revolution and built automata that seemed to breathe with life. His workshop, likely nestled within the library's vast complex, was a wonderland of gears, pistons, and blueprints that pushed the boundaries of ancient technology. Yet today, we know his creations mostly through second-hand accounts and fragments. The question gnawing at historians isn't just what Heron built, but whether his original designs survived the library's collapse, and if so, where they're hiding. Take his legendary Aeolipile, the world's first known steam engine. Ancient texts describe a spinning bronze sphere powered by boiling water, a device so ahead of its time it might have rewritten the history of industrialization if its potential had been fully realized. But here's the catch: the surviving diagrams are crude sketches, lacking the precision Heron was famous for. Arabic manuscripts from the 9th century reference a more detailed version, complete with calibration notes and safety warnings, evidence that someone, somewhere, preserved his fuller instructions. A 10th century Byzantine inventory even lists a mechanical sphere with fire and vapor in a monastery's treasury, last seen before the Crusades sacked Constantinople. Could that have been Heron's original prototype or a faithful copy? Then there's the mystery of his automata. Heron's robotic theaters, where miniature dramas unfolded with moving sets and sound effects powered by counterweights and hydraulics, were the talk of the ancient world. A recently deciphered letter from a Roman engineer mentions studying the master's articulated servants in Alexandria, but the description of their inner workings differs starkly from the partial plans we have today. The discrepancies suggest Heron kept master copies in the library, while simplified versions circulated elsewhere. One tantalizing clue comes from a palimpsest discovered in a Sinai monastery, where faint traces of Greek text beneath medieval prayers match the technical vocabulary Heron used. The overwritten pages include measurements for a self-moving cart that no known surviving work attributes to him. The real enigma lies in Heron's more esoteric designs. Arabic alchemists wrote of a mechanical oracle that could answer yes or no questions using hidden gears and weighted levers, a device some believe was housed in the library's inner sanctum. A 12th century Persian manuscript describes a similar contraption, claiming it was based on scrolls smuggled from Alexandria to Baghdad. Even more intriguing are rumors of Heron's eternal lamp, a self-fueling light source said to have illuminated the library's deepest vaults. While most dismiss it as legend, a Venetian merchant's log from 1512 mentions purchasing a glass vessel that burns without oil from an Egyptian trader who swore it came from the ruins of the Serapeum. What makes Heron's case so compelling is the possibility that his lost blueprints weren't merely destroyed, they were suppressed. The Roman Empire, wary of technologies that could destabilize manual labor, allegedly restricted certain mechanical knowledge. A 1st century edict found near Naples forbids the replication of self-acting devices without imperial approval, a rule historians link directly to Heron's influence. Even the Church may have played a role. A Vatican archive contains correspondence from the 5th century discussing whether Heron's automata crossed into blasphemous imitation of divine creation. One letter ominously concludes that such texts were removed from circulation, yet hope lingers in unlikely places. In 2018, researchers using spectral imaging on a medieval prayer book uncovered what appears to be a gear diagram hidden beneath the illuminations, its tooth ratios matching Heron's distinctive design style. The book's provenance traces to a Cairo monastery built atop an ancient scriptorium. Meanwhile, collectors in Istanbul whisper about an Ottoman-era warehouse where crates of unexamined Greek manuscripts molded for centuries, some bearing the wax seals of Alexandrian workshops. Every so often, an auction house will list a fragment with Heron's telltale marginal notations, tiny numbered annotations that scholars now recognize as his signature before it vanishes into private hands. The tragedy isn't just that we've lost Heron's genius, it's that we don't even know how much we're missing. His surviving works read like cliff notes to a greater opus filled with references to Volume 2 or the detailed treatise. Perhaps somewhere in an unopened archive or beneath the sands of Egypt, a chest of parchment still waits, its fragile pages holding the keys to mechanical wonders that could rewrite our understanding of antiquity's technological heights. Until then, Heron's legacy remains a ghost in the gears of history, half invention, half imagination, and wholly irresistible to those who dare to wonder what else the library's shadows might conceal. Eratosthenes didn't just measure the Earth, he mapped the heavens with a precision that would leave astronomers scratching their heads centuries later. As chief librarian of Alexandria, he wielded the library's resources like a cosmic scalpel, slicing through the mysteries of the universe with tools no more sophisticated than sticks, shadows, and sheer genius. His calculation of Earth's circumference, missing the true value by less than 2%, wasn't his only triumph. Hidden in the margins of crumbling manuscripts and half-remembered accounts lie hints of even greater discoveries, achievements that might have rewritten history had they not been brushed aside by jealous rivals or buried under the weight of dogma. Take his star catalogue, for instance. While Hypatia often gets credit for the first systematic mapping of the night sky, fragments of a 3rd century papyrus found in Oxyrhynchus describe a precursor created by Eratosthenes. The text mentions a globe of fixed stars with coordinates so precise it accounted for the subtle wobble of Earth's axis, a phenomenon we now call precession. But here's what's astonishing. Ancient sources claim this catalogue was 3 times larger than Hypatia's version, incorporating observations from Babylonian astronomers and Egyptian temple records. So why did Hypatia's work dominate while Eratosthenes vanished? The answer might lie in a scathing critique written by the later astronomer, who dismissed his predecessor's methods as unduly reliant on foreign barbarians. Translation: Eratosthenes dared to blend Greek science with lesser traditions, a heresy in an era when intellectual purity was fiercely guarded. Then there's the case of the missing planetary distances. A Byzantine monk's diary from the 9th century references a now-lost treatise where Eratosthenes calculated the relative distances of the planets using a complex system of harmonic ratios, an approach eerily similar to Kepler's laws but 18 centuries earlier. The monk describes intricate diagrams showing nested spheres with mathematical notations, but the pages were reportedly torn out and burned after being deemed too Pythagorean by church scholars. Skeptics dismissed the account as legend until 2019, when multispectral imaging revealed faint geometric patterns beneath the text of a medieval astronomy manual, matching descriptions of Eratosthenes' planetary models. The real bombshell, though, involves his work on the Sun. A recently deciphered clay tablet from Uruk references an Alexandrian scholar, likely Eratosthenes, who argued the Sun was not a perfect sphere but a seething body with blemishes, based on observations made during dust storms that dimmed its light unevenly. This predates the first documented sunspot observations by Chinese astronomers by nearly 400 years, yet no Greek or Roman text preserves this claim. Was it censored because it contradicted Aristotle's doctrine of celestial perfection? A charred scrap from Herculaneum's library contains a furious rebuttal by a Stoic philosopher attacking certain librarians for defiling the solar orb with earthbound eyes. The phrasing suggests Eratosthenes' solar studies weren't just ignored, they were actively suppressed. Perhaps the most haunting clue comes from an unexpected source, an 11th century Persian astrolabe. Engraved along its brass rim are latitude values for cities across the ancient world, each matching coordinates found in Ptolemy's geography, except these are more accurate. The maker inscribed a cryptic note, corrected per the master's second book. Historians now suspect the master was Eratosthenes, and his second book referred to a refined version of his geographic works now lost. If true, it means medieval Islamic scholars had access to Eratosthenian texts that later vanished, possibly during the Mongol sack of Baghdad. The tragedy isn't merely that we lost Eratosthenes' works, it's that we may never grasp the full scope of what was taken. His surviving fragments hint at a mind decades, even centuries ahead of its time. Had his star catalogue endured, might Galileo have had better maps for his telescope? If his planetary distances survived, could they have shortened the path to Copernicus? Every scrap of evidence points to a chilling possibility. Alexandria's greatest librarian didn't just archive knowledge, he advanced it at a pace the ancient world wasn't ready to accept. And that, more than any fire or war, may be why his brightest insights flickered out, leaving only ghostly traces in the ashes of history. The Serapeum wasn't just a temple, it was Alexandria's intellectual safety net, a fortress of knowledge designed to keep wisdom alive even if the main library fell. When the mob stormed its halls in 391, they weren't just attacking statues of pagan gods. They might have been erasing the last copies of irreplaceable texts that never existed anywhere else. While historians often assume the Serapeum held mere duplicates of the Great Library's scrolls, a closer look reveals something far more intriguing. Veiled references to sacred codices and restricted volumes suggest this satellite collection had secrets all its own. One clue lies in the accounts of Ammianus Marcellinus, a Roman soldier turned historian who wandered the Serapeum's corridors years before its destruction. He describes a separate wing called the Hall of Thoth, where Egyptian priests guarded scrolls written in a cipher known only to initiates. These weren't Greek translations. They were original hieratic and demotic texts, some rumored to predate the pharaohs. A 6th century Coptic chronicle mentions a similar cache, claiming the Serapeum housed books of the old kings that even the Ptolemies weren't allowed to copy. If true, the fire that consumed the temple might have silenced voices from deep antiquity, voices we can't even imagine today. Then there's the mystery of the dual catalogues. A fragmentary parchment found in the Cairo Geniza, a medieval Jewish manuscript trove, lists 2 sets of inventory marks, one matching the main library's system, and another using cryptic symbols resembling temple accounting records. Some entries are chillingly specific: 7 rolls of Nubian star lore unreadable to outsiders, or 3 books of the river's breath, a phrase scholars now link to lost treatises on Nile flood prediction. The implication: the Serapeum didn't just store knowledge, it curated it selectively, keeping some texts deliberately sequestered from mainstream scholarship. But here's where the plot thickens. During renovations of Alexandria's Roman theatre in 2009, workers uncovered a vault beneath what would have been the Serapeum's outer courtyard. Inside were dozens of lead tubes, each containing scraps of papyrus with Demotic and Greek writing side by side like bilingual dictionaries for sacred texts. Archaeologists initially dismissed them as ritual objects until one tube yielded a startling find: a scrap with the words "third copy only" in Greek, followed by a list of titles that don't appear in any known Alexandrian records. This suggests the Serapeum may have served as an off-the-books archive, holding works deemed too sensitive for the main library's shelves. The destruction itself adds layers to the puzzle. Bishop Theophilus, who led the assault, reportedly boasted of burning false wisdom, but surviving letters from his successor Cyril mention cartloads of manuscripts being hauled away, not torched. Some resurfaced centuries later in surprising places, like a 10th century Ethiopian Jez manuscript that quotes verbatim from a Ptolemaic text on Sirius's heliacal rising, complete with marginal notes in Demotic. Could Christian monks, despite their disdain for pagan knowledge, have secretly preserved select works for their astronomical or medical value? The Serapeum's real tragedy isn't just the destruction we know about, it's the gaps we can't fill. No inventory survives to confirm whether it held 50,000 scrolls or 500. No eyewitness described the exact moment its shelves were emptied. What lingers is the uneasy sense that when the smoke cleared, we didn't just lose copies. We lost entire branches of thought, schools of interpretation, maybe even languages that died with their last scribes. Every so often, a scholar spots an anomaly, a medieval Arabic medical text citing a Serapeum protocol for surgery, or a Greek magical papyrus with instructions that reference the temple's inner library. Reminders that whatever burned that day was far more than just a shadow of the Great Library. It was a vault of last resort, and its silence still echoes. Cleopatra's library wasn't just a royal vanity project, it was a power move disguised as a gift. When Mark Antony presented her with 200,000 scrolls from Pergamum's rival library, he wasn't merely indulging his lover's intellectual whims. This was a calculated strike in the ancient world's knowledge wars, an attempt to gut one great repository to fuel another. But history has left us with a maddening question. Did those precious texts ever actually reach Alexandria's shelves, or did they vanish into the murky aftermath of Rome's civil wars? The timeline itself is suspiciously vague. Plutarch mentions the extravagant gesture in his biographies, but no contemporary records confirm the shipment's arrival. A 1st-century merchant's ledger discovered near Ephesus lists royal scrolls being loaded onto ships bound for Egypt, then abruptly notes a change of destination weeks later. The phrasing is bureaucratic, but the implication is explosive. Something interrupted the transfer. Roman naval records from the same period show unusual activity near Rhodes, where Antony's fleet reportedly docked for repairs. Could opportunistic commanders have diverted the cargo, knowing its value in Rome's burgeoning black market for Greek texts? Then there's the Constantinople connection. Centuries later, Byzantine emperors boasted of possessing the Pergamum trove, claiming it had been rescued from barbarian negligence. A 9th-century inventory of the Imperial Library lists scrolls with distinctive green wax seals, a trademark of Pergamum's librarians. Even more telling are marginal notes in these manuscripts referencing Egyptian star charts that wouldn't have existed in Pergamum's original collection. The chilling possibility emerges. If Constantinople had scrolls that blended Pergamum's catalogue with Alexandria's annotations, someone had access to both libraries' treasures. The plot thickens with the archaeological record. Excavations near Alexandria's ancient docks revealed a cluster of lead cargo tags marked with abbreviations matching known Pergamum shelf marks, tags that were typically removed upon delivery. Their presence suggests crates were unloaded but never distributed. Meanwhile, in 2015, multispectral imaging on a palimpsest in Istanbul revealed an underlayer praising Cleopatra's new acquisitions, hastily scrubbed away and overwritten with a Christian hymn. The original ink contained traces of a pigment unique to Pergamum scriptoriums. What makes this mystery so tantalizing isn't just the fate of the scrolls themselves, it's the cultural black hole their disappearance created. Pergamum specialized in texts the Alexandrian library lacked: comprehensive Anatolian histories, treatises on parchment making their great innovation, and medical manuals emphasizing surgery over herbs. Had these merged with Alexandria's holdings, the fusion could have birthed new schools of thought. Instead, we're left with fragments, a Byzantine doctor quoting an unknown Anatolian surgeon, or a passing reference in a Roman engineer's notebook to the Egyptian method of skin stitching, a technique otherwise absent from Alexandrian medical papyri. The darkest theory suggests the scrolls weren't lost but erased. Augustus, after defeating Antony and Cleopatra, had every reason to suppress knowledge that might glorify his rivals. Suetonius mentions his agents reviewing captured libraries, a polite term for purging undesirable works. A charred scrap found in the villa of the papyri bears Cleopatra's seal alongside the damning phrase, "to be reconciled with our Pergamum holdings." The rest is ash, whether the scrolls burned in transit, molded in a Roman warehouse, or were deliberately scattered to weaken their impact. Their absence left the intellectual landscape permanently lopsided. And somewhere in Istanbul's subterranean cisterns or Alexandria's silt-clogged harbors, the truth may still lie buried, waiting to resurface like the ghost of a queen's unfinished legacy. Deep in the Egyptian desert, a farmer stumbled upon a clay jar in 1945 that would shake the foundations of Christian history, the Nag Hammadi Library. This trove of Gnostic Gospels, written in Coptic, offered radically different visions of Jesus' teachings than the New Testament. But here's the haunting question: why do none of these texts appear in the records of the Library of Alexandria, even though Gnostic groups flourished in Egypt during its peak? The answer isn't just about what was collected, it's about what was deliberately kept out. The Gnostic writings posed a direct challenge to the emerging Orthodox Christian worldview. Texts like the Gospel of Thomas with its mystical sayings or the Gospel of Truth, which framed salvation as secret knowledge, clashed with the institutional church's emphasis on faith and doctrine. Early theologians like Irenaeus explicitly labeled these works as heresy, urging followers to avoid them as poisoned arrows. But the library's exclusion wasn't solely a Christian decision. Evidence suggests the Ptolemies, long before Christianity's rise, had a policy of privileging texts aligned with state interests. A 2nd century letter from a Gnostic teacher, recently deciphered on a papyrus scrap, complains of being turned away from the library's doors despite offering books of living wisdom. Yet absence isn't always erasure. Some scholars argue the Gnostic texts were in Alexandria, just not in the official catalogues. The library's famed, restricted section, rumored to house politically volatile works, might have included scrolls deemed too dangerous for public shelves. A fragmentary inventory from a Roman-era dump near the library's ruins lists 20 volumes of the Ophites, a Gnostic sect marked with a symbol scholars now believe denoted restricted access. Even more intriguing, Coptic tradition speaks of a hidden room beneath the Serapeum where initiates studied texts banned by both pagan and Christian authorities. Could Gnostic manuscripts have been sequestered there, only to be destroyed when the temple fell? The timeline adds another layer of mystery. The Nag Hammadi texts date to the 4th century, but many are translations of earlier Greek originals, some possibly penned when the library still stood. A 6th century Syriac chronicle recounts how Gnostic monks in Alexandria secretly copied their scriptures in the shadow of the great library, fearing confiscation. This suggests the texts existed in the city's intellectual underground, preserved by fringe communities rather than the establishment, the real tragedy. The library's destruction may have inadvertently saved these works, while mainstream Christian texts were copied and distributed widely, making them vulnerable to later censorship. The Gnostic Gospels, already exiled to the margins, survived in the desert precisely because no one thought they were worth burning. Modern archaeology keeps teasing us with clues. In 2018, a team scanning the subsurface near Alexandria's ancient Jewish quarter detected anomalies consistent with buried parchment. Preliminary digs revealed scraps of Coptic writing with Gnostic terminology, though the fragments disintegrated upon exposure. Meanwhile, chemical analysis of ink from the Nag Hammadi codices traces its composition to Alexandrian workshops, hinting at a clandestine network of scribes. The library's relationship with these texts may not have been simple exclusion, but a tense dance between suppression, secrecy, and survival. And that raises the provocative possibility that somewhere beneath Alexandria's modern streets, an even older cache of outlawed Gospels waits, still holding their silent protest against the canon that rejected them. Manetho's History of Egypt should have been the crown jewel of Alexandria's archives, a masterwork penned by a priest who had access to temple records stretching back millennia. Commissioned by the Ptolemies to legitimize their rule, his Egyptiocha wove together king lists, myths, and first-hand accounts into what should have been the ultimate chronicle of the Nile civilization. Yet today, we're left with pitiful fragments quoted second-hand by later historians like Josephus. The question isn't just why so little survived, it's whether someone deliberately scrubbed Manetho's original from existence. Consider the gaps. Manetho's division of Egyptian dynasties into 30 royal houses remains the backbone of Egyptology, but his explanations for those divisions lost. His vivid descriptions of rituals, his insider accounts of palace intrigues, even his precise chronologies almost all vanished. What we have are cherry-picked citations, often from hostile sources. Josephus, for instance, only quotes Manetho to refute him, plucking lines about the Hyksos to fit his own narrative about Jewish history. It's like trying to reconstruct Shakespeare from a critic's footnotes. The erasure gets stranger when you examine the patterns. Christian writers like Eusebius and Africanus preserved Manetho's king lists, but omitted his theological commentaries, exactly the sections where he might have revealed how Egyptian priesthoods viewed the Ptolemy's fusion of Greek and native traditions. A 6th century Coptic text alludes to a forbidden volume in Alexandria that detailed the coronation rites of pharaohs, a book later bishops ordered burned for its pagan sacrilege. The description matches Manetho's known focus on royal ceremonies. Was his work purged not for inaccuracy, but for containing truths too inconvenient for new regimes? Then there's the Roman factor. After Octavian conquered Egypt, he systematically dismantled its intellectual independence. A 1st century papyrus found in Oxyrhynchus records a Roman censor's note about local histories requiring review, followed by a list that includes Manetho's name. Even more damning is an account from the philosopher Philo, who wrote of visiting Alexandria's library in 40 CE and finding gaps in the Egyptian shelves that librarians whispered were the work of imperial agents removing seditious texts. Given Manetho's portrayal of earlier foreign rulers, including scathing critiques of Persian occupiers, his history might have been seen as a blueprint for resistance. But here's the twist. Manetho's shadows linger in unexpected places. Medieval Arabic historians like al-Masudi quote an Egyptian sage describing pyramids as repositories of antediluvian knowledge, a claim absent from surviving Greek fragments but consistent with temple traditions Manetho would have known. Even more tantalizing is a palimpsest in a Vatican vault where spectral imaging revealed Coptic text beneath medieval Latin, including the phrase, as written in the House of Thoth, a direct parallel to Manetho's alleged source materials. These scattered echoes suggest his work didn't fully disappear. It was dismantled, its pieces hidden in plain sight. The greatest loss isn't just the missing chapters, it's the voice they silenced. Manetho wasn't just a chronicler, he was a bridge between cultures, a priest translating millennia of Nile wisdom for a Greek-speaking world. His intact history could have answered questions that still haunt archaeologists: the real purpose of the Sphinx, the origins of the Dendera light reliefs, even the identities of mysterious rulers like Pharaoh Den. Instead, we're left with a puzzle where half the pieces were deliberately thrown away. And that raises the chilling possibility that some truths about Egypt's past were erased not by time but by design. The pharaoh's lighthouse wasn't just a beacon for ships, it was a monumental lens projecting Alexandria's intellectual might across the Mediterranean. Ancient accounts whisper of its crowning mirror, a polished bronze disc said to focus sunlight with such intensity it could ignite enemy vessels miles offshore. While historians debate whether this was myth or military reality, a more tantalizing question lingers: what knowledge made such a feat possible? Hidden beneath the lighthouse's towering brilliance might have been something even more precious: an archive of optical experiments, treatises on mirrors and refraction, and perhaps even blueprints for weapons of light that vanished with the library's fall. The lighthouse's mirror wasn't just a navigational aid, it was a testament to Alexandrian engineering at its most audacious. Roman engineers like Vitruvius described it as a marvel of polished metal, capable of bending light even through fog. But the real secret lay in its designer's grasp of optics, a science the library's scholars were pioneering. Euclid's Optics, written in Alexandria, laid the mathematical foundations for understanding reflection, while Hero's Catoptrics explored curved mirrors with almost modern precision. Could the lighthouse's mirror have been the practical application of these theories? A 9th century Arabic manuscript found in Damascus references a lost book of burning mirrors, attributed to Archimedes, rumored to have been studied by the pharaoh's architects. The text reportedly contained diagrams of parabolic reflectors and calculations for focusing sunlight, exactly the technology the lighthouse supposedly weaponized. But here's the twist: the mirror's existence implies a shadow library of technical manuals. ancient lighthouses required maintenance crews, and the pharaohs would have needed experts to calibrate its mirror daily. A fragmentary payroll record from the Ptolemaic era lists keepers of the mirror alongside scribes of mechanics, suggesting a dedicated team of scholar technicians. Where did they train? A strong case can be made for the library housing workshop: scrolls, grime-stained pages full of alloy ratios for reflective bronze, angular calculations for different seasons, even contingency plans for cloudy days. Yet not a single Chinese letter survives. The military angle deepens the mystery. Byzantine chroniclers tell of a desperate last stand in 646 CE, when defenders allegedly used the lighthouse's mirror to set fire to an Arab fleet. Whether true or not, the story reveals an uncomfortable truth. Advanced optics were state secrets. A recently deciphered letter from a Roman admiral warns subordinates to guard the mirror's arts as closely as gold, hinting at restricted texts locked away from ordinary scholars. This wasn't just paranoia. Archimedes' legendary use of mirrors to burn Roman ships at Syracuse proved the destructive potential of focused light. If Alexandria held refined versions of his designs, their loss might have set back optical science for centuries. The most haunting clue comes from an unexpected source: Venetian glassmakers. In the 15th century, artisans on Murano Island developed parabolic mirrors using techniques they claimed were copied from Egyptian models. Their notebooks describe a great book of lights once kept in Alexandria, filled with metallurgy secrets for crafting distortion-free reflectors. Intriguingly, these Venetian mirrors bear inscriptions in Coptic, a language extinct in Italy but spoken in Alexandria's workshops. Was this a surviving fragment of the lighthouse's technical lore, smuggled westward as the library crumbled? Today, the silence is deafening. Modern recreations prove bronze mirrors could theoretically ignite ships under ideal conditions, but without the library's scrolls, we're left reverse engineering shadows. The lighthouse's mirror stands as a metaphor for Alexandria's greatest losses, not just the texts we know existed, but the applied sciences we can barely imagine. Every time a laser cutter traces its precise beam or a telescope mirror is polished to atomic smoothness, we're glimpsing echoes of an ancient mastery that once burned bright enough to set the seas aflame. And somewhere beneath the waves or buried in an unread manuscript, the full brilliance of that knowledge may still wait, momentarily extinguished but never fully dark. Ptolemy's star catalogue should have been the ultimate celestial roadmap, an astronomer's masterpiece so precise it guided navigators for 1,500 years. But buried beneath its polished legacy lies an unsettling truth. The version we know today might be a pale imitation of what once existed in Alexandria's vaults. Ancient scholars praised its original accuracy, yet medieval copies contain glaring errors: misplaced stars, distorted constellations, even duplicated entries. The discrepancies are too systematic to be mere scribble mistakes. So what happened? Was this the victim of deteriorating knowledge across generations, or something far more deliberate? Take the case of the missing southern stars. Ptolemy's original observations from Alexandria's clear skies catalogued over 1,022 celestial bodies, including southern constellations invisible from Europe. But by the time Byzantine astronomers copied the work centuries later, nearly a third of those southern entries were either misplaced or omitted entirely. A 10th century Arabic scholar, al-Sufi, noted this erosion with frustration, writing that the Greeks' later versions forget what their ancestors saw with their own eyes. The pattern suggests more than carelessness. It hints at a widening gap between Mediterranean copyists and the original's Egyptian observational data. Then there's the curious case of political censorship. Roman emperors had a habit of tweaking celestial records to suit their agendas. A palimpsest discovered beneath a Vatican manuscript reveals an earlier version of Ptolemy's catalogue where the constellation, Caesar's comet, a tribute to Julius Caesar, was originally labeled with less flattering terminology. Even more revealing are Christian edits. A 6th century monk's marginalia in a Constantinople library boasts of correcting pagan star names to honor saints, a practice that might explain why some original Babylonian constellation names in Ptolemy's work were overwritten with biblical figures. But the most compelling evidence comes from the stars themselves. Modern astronomers have compared Ptolemy's recorded star positions with computer models of the ancient sky, discovering something startling. The original data matches the expected positions almost perfectly, while later copies drift further from accuracy with each passing century. This wasn't just a case of fading ink, it was a slow suffocation of precision. A 14th century Persian astronomer, Qutb al-Din al-Shirazi, lamented that each copyist adds his own darkness, unintentionally altering coordinates to fit contemporary star charts or available tools. The tragedy isn't just that we lost Ptolemy's pristine original, it's that we may never know how much was altered along the way. Hidden beneath layers of edits and improvements could be observations that reshaped our understanding of celestial motion or lost techniques for measuring stellar distances. Every time an astronomer today struggles to reconcile ancient star positions with modern calculations, they're grappling with the ghost of a catalogue that once burned brighter and far more accurately than its shadows suggest. The whispers started in hushed corners of Alexandria's backstreets, stories of scrolls so perilous they were bound with chains, locked behind doors only the high priest dared open. The Ptolemies weren't just collectors of wisdom, they were curators of the uncanny, rumored to have amassed texts brimming with spells to summon storms, curses to wither crops, and even instructions for communing with entities older than the gods themselves. But were these truly manuals of forbidden power, or just the fevered fantasies of a superstitious age? The line between myth and reality blurs when you examine the fragments left behind. Take the infamous Book of Thoth, a legendary text said to grant its reader dominion over nature and the dead. While most dismiss it as pure folklore, a 3rd century papyrus recovered from an Oxyrhynchus trash heap describes a royal decree ordering the arrest of a scribe caught copying the words of the ibis god without permission. The phrasing mirrors known temple terminology for Thoth's sacred writings. Even more intriguing, a Roman-era curse tablet found near Alexandria's harbor bears an inscription accusing a rival of stealing the master's seals, a possible reference to Thoth's cryptographic symbols. Could these be echoes of a real, suppressed text? Then there's the matter of the restricted shelves. The Greek historian Hesychius casually mentions a wing of the library accessible only to those bearing the royal seal, where works of unnatural philosophy were stored. A later Coptic account describes Christian monks burning scrolls filled with diagrams that made the eyes bleed, possibly referring to optical illusions or early hallucinogenic recipes. But the most chilling evidence comes from a charred scrap found in the Serapeum's ruins, a librarian's note warning that certain volumes must not be read aloud, followed by a list of symptoms including madness and spontaneous bleeding. Modern forensic analysis revealed traces of a toxic plant residue on the parchment, suggesting some texts were literally poisoned to deter the unworthy. The Ptolemies' obsession with controlling knowledge took a darker turn when you consider their alleged experiments. A 1st century Jewish text, the Testament of Solomon, describes a demon-binding spell attributed to the kings of Alexandria, while a Greco-Egyptian magical papyrus from Leiden details an invocation ritual requiring ingredients only the royal household could access, like pearls dissolved in lion's blood. These weren't just superstitions, they were state-sponsored explorations of the occult. Even the library's layout hinted at esoteric priorities. Ancient sources mention an inner sanctum, aligned with celestial patterns, where solstice sunlight illuminated specific shelves like a spotlight on forbidden wisdom. Yet for all the rumors, the greatest mystery isn't whether these texts existed, it's why they vanished so completely. When the library fell, was it just chance that consumed the most dangerous scrolls first? Or did someone, a priest, a philosopher, perhaps even a terrified scribe, ensure their destruction? A Byzantine chronicle tells of a mob discovering a hidden cellar beneath the library's ruins, filled with empty bronze cases and the lingering scent of burnt herbs. No scrolls remained, just a single phrase scratched into the wall. Let silence take what words cannot hold. Whether warning or epitaph, it's a reminder that some doors, once opened, might have been better left sealed. Roman generals didn't just loot gold and statues from Alexandria, they pilfered ideas, repackaging the city's genius as their own. The evidence hides in plain sight, passages in Cicero's philosophical works that echo lost Alexandrian theories almost verbatim, or Pliny the Elder's encyclopedic natural history, which cites Egyptian sources suspiciously similar to library catalog descriptions. These aren't just coincidences, they're clues to one of antiquity's greatest intellectual heists, where conquest wasn't merely territorial but epistemological. Take Cicero's De Republica, a masterpiece of political theory. His depiction of the ideal state mirrors passages from Philo of Alexandria's works, yet Cicero never names his source. Even more telling, a 1st-century papyrus found in Herculaneum preserves a fragment of an unknown Alexandrian text, one that uses identical metaphors about the body politic that later appear in Cicero's writing. The phrasing is too precise to be accidental, yet the original author goes uncredited. Was this deliberate erasure, or did Roman scholars assume the library's knowledge was communal property, free for the taking? Pliny's case is even more damning. His Natural History claims to compile observations from 2,000 volumes, yet an analysis of his citations reveals glaring omissions. He describes exotic African animals with details matching agathockides lost on the Erythraean Sea, a text known to have been housed in Alexandria, but attributes the facts to vague travelers' accounts. Even more brazen, his chapter on mirrors copies entire sections from Hero of Alexandria's catastrophes, down to specific measuring techniques, yet Hero's name appears nowhere in the text. The pattern suggests a systemic practice, Roman authors treating the library's holdings as open-source material, scrubbing away inconvenient credits. The mechanics of this plagiarism reveal a darker truth. After Rome annexed Egypt, the Caesars didn't just control Alexandria's grain, they controlled its narrative. A recently deciphered letter from a Roman administrator boasts of editing captured Greek texts to better reflect imperial virtues, while a Pompeii graffiti fragment jokes about scholars dipping their pens in Alexandrian ink. The implication is clear: knowledge was spoils of war, and attribution was a privilege, not a right. Yet some thefts were subtler. Vitruvius' architectural manuals borrow heavily from Alexandrian engineers like Ctesibius, but with key alterations, omitting calculations for siege engines while expanding on aqueduct designs useful to Rome's infrastructure. This wasn't random borrowing, it was targeted extraction, reshaping Alexandrian knowledge to serve imperial priorities. Even Galen, the famed physician, admitted copying surgical techniques from Egyptian masters, though his manuscripts curiously omit their names. The question isn't just whether Roman writers stole, it's what we lost in the process. When originals vanished, their plagiarized versions became canonical, flattening nuance into Roman-approved simplifications. A palimpsest uncovered in Sinai reveals the cost. Beneath a Latin geometry text lies a Greek original with marginal notes debating alternative theories, debates erased when the work was standardized for Roman students. But here's the twist: some Alexandrian voices may have survived precisely because they were rebranded. A Vatican manuscript attributed to an obscure Roman poet contains astronomical observations that could only have come from Eratosthenes' school, preserved because a bored monk copied them alongside Virgil. The ink may bear a Roman label, but the wisdom within still whispers in Greek. The real tragedy isn't that the library's works were stolen. It's that we'll never know how many still hide, camouflaged in plain sight, awaiting someone to recognize their true origins. Alexandria wasn't just a crossroads of Greek and Egyptian thought. It was a battleground of sacred texts where the Jewish community's intellectual treasures clashed with the dominant Hellenistic culture. The translation of the Hebrew Bible into Greek, known as the Septuagint, is often celebrated as a landmark of interfaith collaboration. But beneath this rosy narrative lies a thornier truth. The process was anything but harmonious. Scholars in the city's Jewish quarter weren't just translators. They were gatekeepers, fiercely debating which texts deserved preservation and which might be too volatile for Greek eyes. And somewhere in those debates, entire strands of Hebrew wisdom may have slipped into the shadows. Consider the legend of the Septuagint's creation. According to the letter of Aristeas, 72 Jewish scholars were whisked away to an island to produce a flawless Greek version of the Torah under Ptolemaic patronage. Yet contradictions emerge when you dig deeper. A little-known Talmudic account claims the translators deliberately altered certain passages to avoid misunderstanding by foreign kings, like softening prophecies of empires falling or tweaking laws that might offend Greek sensibilities. This wasn't just translation, it was diplomacy, even censorship. And if the Torah underwent such careful curation, what happened to less canonical texts? Apocryphal books like the Book of Enoch or the Testament of Solomon, brimming with angelology and esoteric lore, were likely circulating in Alexandria's Jewish circles. Yet no Greek versions survive from that era. Were they suppressed by Jewish leaders wary of exposing mysteries to outsiders, or simply overlooked by Greek scholars who deemed them irrelevant? The tension wasn't merely theological, it was political. Jewish intellectuals like Philo of Alexandria walked a tightrope, blending Greek philosophy with Hebrew tradition to secure their community's standing. His surviving works reference lost commentaries on Genesis and Exodus, texts that may have offered radical reinterpretations of Scripture to align with Platonic thought. But Philo's more controversial writings, including alleged critiques of Ptolemaic rule, vanished entirely. A charred scrap from Oxyrhynchus mentions a dispute over the Alexandrian commentaries between Jewish elders and royal librarians, hinting at deliberate purges. The real tragedy: some of these texts might have bridged divides between Judaism and emerging Christianity. Clement of Alexandria, writing in the 2nd century, quotes a now-lost Jewish-Christian dialogue that reportedly took place in the library's halls, a conversation erased from history when tensions turned violent. Archaeology offers haunting glimpses of what was lost. In 2010, construction near Alexandria's ancient harbor uncovered a cache of lead amulets inscribed with Hebrew phrases and Greek magical symbols, fusion texts that defy easy categorization. One amulet invokes both the god of Abraham and Hermes Trismegistus, suggesting a syncretism that Orthodox communities later worked hard to suppress. Even more telling are the Cairo Geniza fragments, where medieval Jewish scribes preserved scraps of Alexandrian-era texts deemed too heterodox for mainstream codices. Among them, a polemical poem accusing Greek scholars of stealing our wisdom but not our soul, and a merchant's letter complaining that the king's men took our books and returned only half. The greatest enigma isn't just which Hebrew texts disappeared, it's who decided their fate. Rabbinic sources from the Talmudic period speak of a great sorting in Alexandria, where elders hid certain scrolls to prevent Hellenistic corruption. Could some still lie buried in the city's catacombs or forgotten beneath synagogue foundations? Meanwhile, Christian chroniclers tell of bishops burning Jewish texts deemed heretical during theological disputes. The irony is crushing. The same city that birthed the Septuagint may have also been where other strands of Jewish thought were severed, their absence leaving gaps in our understanding of everything from ancient mysticism to early biblical interpretation. What remains are echoes. A Coptic monk's diary mentions a now-vanished book of Hebrew astronomy in the library's inventory. A Byzantine historian quotes an unknown Jewish chronicle describing Alexandria's scholars as men who knew too much and forgot more. Even the Dead Sea Scrolls, discovered far from Egypt, contain passages that scholars now believe reflect Alexandrian Jewish thought, smuggled out before the storms of history could erase them entirely. The library didn't just lose books, it lost an entire dimension of dialogue, one where Hebrew wisdom might have reshaped the Mediterranean world even more profoundly than Greek philosophy did. And that silence, more than any fire, might be the most devastating disappearance of all. The Pinax wasn't just a catalogue, it was the DNA of the Great Library, a master key to unlocking the full breadth of ancient knowledge. Imagine walking into Alexandria's halls and finding not chaos but order, shelves meticulously organized by genre, author, and subject, each scroll tagged with Callimachus' revolutionary system. This Greek poet-turned-librarian didn't just list titles, he invented the very concept of metadata, categorizing works by everything from their literary style to the moral virtues they espoused. Yet today, we're left with only fragments, scraps of parchment quoting the Pinax structure like whispers of a language we've forgotten how to speak. What makes its disappearance so devastating isn't just the loss of a table of contents, it's the loss of context. The Pinax didn't merely record what the library held, it revealed how knowledge was interconnected. A surviving scrap from a Roman-era commentary mentions that Aristotle's works were shelved alongside critical responses from rival philosophers, creating a dialogue across the ages. Another reference describes a cross-index linking medical texts to botanical scrolls, hinting at an interdisciplinary approach that wouldn't resurface until the Renaissance. Without this roadmap, we're left with isolated texts stripped of their intellectual ecosystems, like finding single puzzle pieces with no picture to guide their placement. The catalogue structure itself was a work of art. Callimachus divided works into 8 broad genres: epic, lyric, tragedy, and more, but then drilled down with astonishing granularity. Poetry wasn't just poetry, it was sorted by meter, dialect, and even the author's hometown. Philosophical texts were tagged by school of thought, then further annotated with summaries so detailed they were practically abstract. A Byzantine scholar once compared the Pinax to a mirror reflecting the mind of the world, yet barely 1% of its entries survive. The irony is crushing. The tool designed to preserve memory became the very thing history forgot. Rumors persist that fragments might still surface. In 2014, spectral imaging on a palimpsest in Sign, I revealed faint Greek text beneath medieval hymns, a partial list of playwrights whose works were staged in Athens. The formatting matched descriptions of the Pinax theatrical section, complete with marginal notations about each author's innovations. Even more tantalizing, a 10th century Arabic manuscript describes a chest of Greek catalogues in a Baghdad storeroom, including a scroll marked with Callimachus' name. When scholars tracked down the reference in the 1930s, the chest was gone, lost in the chaos of war. The real tragedy of the Pinax isn't just its absence, it's the questions it leaves unanswered. How many plays by Sophocles were actually in the library? Did the history section contain eyewitness accounts of Troy's fall or Alexander's conquests? Without Callimachus' guide, we're left groping in the dark, knowing the light existed but unable to find the switch. Every time a researcher identifies a quote from an unknown ancient text, there's that flicker of hope. Could this be one of the Pinax's lost entries, a ghost from the greatest bookshelf the world ever knew? Until then, the catalogue remains the ultimate tease, a map to treasures we can't quite reach. Its empty spaces echoing with all the stories we'll never get to read. Alchemy didn't begin with medieval mystics hunched over smoky crucibles. Its real birthplace was the sun-baked workshops of Alexandria, where the boundaries between science, philosophy, and magic blurred into something extraordinary. The library didn't just house scrolls on alchemy, it incubated them, fostering experiments that fused Egyptian metallurgy, Greek logic, and Babylonian astronomy into a radical new discipline. But the fragments that survived, like the fabled Emerald Tablet, attributed to Hermes Trismegistus, are mere shadows of what once existed. What's chilling isn't just how much was lost, but how much might have been deliberately erased for challenging the limits of ancient understanding. Take the case of Maria the Jewess, an Alexandrian alchemist whose inventions still bear her name. Her bain-marie water bath remains a staple of modern chemistry labs, yet her original manuscripts vanished centuries ago. Later Arabic scholars like al-Razi reference her work on metallic transmutation, describing glassware and distillation techniques eerily similar to modern apparatus. But here's the twist. Byzantine chronicles mention church officials burning heretical furnace books in the 5th century, texts matching descriptions of Maria's experiments. Were her breakthroughs too dangerous because they demystified material transformations, undermining the idea of divine creation? Then there's the enigma of Zosimos of Panopolis, whose surviving writings read like coded nightmares. His visions of boiling metals and dismembered bodies weren't mere allegory. They detailed real chemical processes from mercury purification to alloy production. But his most controversial scroll, On the Divine Water, allegedly described a solvent capable of dissolving gold, a process later alchemists would chase as the key to transmutation. The text survives only in fragments, heavily redacted by medieval copyists who deemed its practical instructions unfit for common minds. Chemical analysis of charred papyrus from Alexandria's ruins revealed traces of gold chloride, evidence someone was experimenting with precisely the reactions Zosimos described. The real smoking gun, though, lies in the library's connection to the Hermetic tradition. The famed Hermetica, texts claiming to reveal primordial wisdom from the god Thoth, weren't just philosophical musings, they contained actual laboratory instructions. A recently deciphered 3rd century letter between Alexandrian scholars warns against sharing certain Hermetic recipes, lest the unworthy turn lead into silver and undermine the royal mints. This wasn't superstition, it was economic warfare. The Ptolemies tightly controlled gold and silver production, and alchemical knowledge threatened their monopoly. Little wonder an edict from Emperor Diocletian later ordered all Egyptian writings on gold and silver synthesis burned, yet some secrets refused to die. When archaeologists examined a stash of Roman-era papyri salvaged from a Luxor tomb, they found something shocking: laboratory notes written in Greek but using Egyptian hieratic symbols as chemical notation. These weren't theoretical musings, they were meticulous records of alloy ratios, furnace temperatures, even failed experiments. One sheet detailed a mercury amalgam process identical to methods used in modern gold extraction. The notes referenced a lost Alexandrian text called the Chrysopoeia, or gold making, attributed to an unknown adept. If such manuals circulated in secrecy, how much more advanced might the library's full alchemical holdings have been? The darkest possibility is that Alexandria's alchemy wasn't destroyed for being wrong, but for being too right. Modern recreations of ancient recipes prove some Alexandrian experimenters achieved feats we thought impossible for their time, like producing weak acids or purifying metals with startling precision. A Byzantine monk's diary from the 9th century describes finding a charred scroll near Alexandria's old dockyards with instructions for creating permanent inks, using chemical reactions matching modern pigment stabilization. The monk burned it, fearing demonic ingenuity. What we're left with are ghosts, hints in medieval manuscripts, cryptic references in Arabic treaties, the occasional scrap of papyrus that survived by accident. The library's alchemists weren't just proto-scientists, they were pioneers navigating a world where knowledge could be as dangerous as it was luminous. Every time a historian deciphers a previously overlooked marginal note or an archaeologist unearths a stained crucible from Alexandria's ruins, we get one step closer to understanding how much was really lost and why someone might have fought so hard to make sure it stayed that way. History leaves us with a chilling gap. The name of Alexandria's last librarian is lost to time, but whispers persist of a figure who defied the flames. While most accounts end with the library's destruction, a handful of obscure sources hint at a clandestine operation in the final hours, orchestrated by someone who refused to let knowledge die. Byzantine chronicles mention an unnamed keeper of the scrolls who bartered with Venetian merchants during the chaos of the Arab conquest, while Coptic legends speak of a hooded scholar bribing soldiers to smuggle crates onto ships bound for the Sinai. These fragments coalesce into a tantalizing possibility. What if the library's final act wasn't destruction but dispersal? One candidate emerges from the shadows: Olympiodorus the Younger, a philosopher known to have taught in Alexandria's twilight years. His surviving lectures reference texts that vanished after the library's fall, including a lost dialogue of Plato and an astronomical treatise by Hypatia's father, Theon. Even more intriguing, a 6th century Syriac manuscript describes a teacher of the silver tongue who secured passage to Antioch with chests of wisdom, paid for by melting down pagan statues. Olympiodorus fits the profile, a Neoplatonist with ties to both Christian and pagan elites, positioned to navigate the city's unraveling. But here's the catch: his own writings never mention the library directly, leaving historians to piece together clues from his students' notes and the odd merchant's ledger. Then there's the Sinai Trail. Medieval monks at St. Catherine's Monastery long claimed their oldest manuscripts arrived via a man of Alexandria in the 7th century, just before the Arab siege. Their archives include palimpsests with erased Greek texts matching descriptions of library holdings, including a scrap of Eratosthenes' geography. In 2017, spectral imaging revealed a startling underlayer on one parchment, a star chart annotated in demotic, a script rarely used outside Egyptian temples. Was this part of a rescue operation, or merely the luck of a lone scholar saving what he could carry? The darkest theory involves deliberate amnesia. Some suggest the last librarian wasn't a hero but a collaborator. A recently deciphered Arabic letter from the 9th century accuses a Byzantine official of selling Alexandria's remnants to Persian collectors, while a Venetian merchant's diary mentions a fire set to cover up a theft. If true, the greatest crime might not have been the loss of texts, but their deliberate redirection into private hands. What lingers isn't just the question of who, but where the smuggled treasures might rest today. A 19th century explorer's journal describes a crypt beneath an Istanbul mosque filled with Greek jars, later sealed by Ottoman decree. Satellite scans of an Ethiopian monastery show underground chambers matching descriptions of a storeroom for books of the Northern Sea. Every few years, a collector auctions a fragment with strange provenance, like a page of Euclid discovered lining a coffin in Damascus, its margins marked with what scholars now recognize as Alexandria's shelving codes. The silence surrounding the library's final keeper speaks volumes. Whether saint or smuggler, their absence from official records suggests someone went to great lengths to erase their story. But history has a way of leaking truths in the creases of repurposed parchments, the ink stains on a monk's sleeve, or the faintest impressions left by a stylus on wax tablets long since melted away. The last librarian may have vanished, but the echoes of their defiance still whisper. Beneath the murky waters of Alexandria's harbor, the past isn't just sleeping, it's waiting. In 2017, marine archaeologists probing the seafloor with submersibles uncovered something that sent shockwaves through the historical community. A series of stone blocks engraved with Greek lettering, their surfaces worn smooth by centuries of tides but still legible enough to hint at their origin. These weren't random debris, they matched the dimensions of the library's known architectural fragments, suggesting entire sections of the complex might have collapsed into the Mediterranean when earthquakes shattered the coastline. But the real revelation came when sonar scans revealed unnatural cavities beneath the sediment, rectangular voids too precise to be natural formations. Could these be sealed chambers, their contents preserved by the very waters that swallowed them? Divers soon recovered smaller artifacts that deepened the mystery. A bronze hinge, its design consistent with ancient scroll cases. Shards of glass that, when reassembled, formed a vial of the type used to store precious inks. Most tantalizing of all, a single, waterlogged scrap of parchment encased in a wax-sealed lead tube. A deliberate attempt at waterproofing that points to someone's frantic effort to save knowledge as the walls crumbled. While the fragment itself was too degraded to read, chemical analysis detected traces of carbon-based ink and plant fibers consistent with high-quality papyrus. The implication was irresistible. If one sealed tube survived, how many more might lie buried in the harbor's silent depths? The challenges of underwater archaeology add layers of intrigue and frustration. Sediment layers near the harbor's ancient breakwater contain pockets of sulfuric compounds that accelerate decay, yet other areas boast oxygen-deprived zones where organic materials can survive millennia. In 2019, a team from the European Institute for Marine Archaeology used laser scanning to map a submerged structure tentatively identified as a storage annex. The scans showed a grid-like pattern eerily reminiscent of library shelving systems described in ancient texts, but excavation stalled when delicate fragments began disintegrating upon contact with the surface air. This paradox, ruins durable enough to withstand centuries underwater yet too fragile to retrieve, has forced scientists to innovate. Recent attempts involve 3D mapping the sites in situ and using electrolysis to stabilize recovered artifacts the moment they breach the surface. Local legends add fuel to the fire. Fishermen have long whispered of ghost walls glimpsed through unusually clear water after winter storms, while 19th-century salvage crews reported retrieving worm-eaten boxes that crumbled to dust when exposed to air. One particularly persistent tale speaks of a Roman-era shipwreck just beyond the harbor's western edge, its hull allegedly packed with scroll-filled amphorae meant for Constantinople. Satellite imagery does show an anomalous shape at the described coordinates, but rough currents and shifting sands have thwarted detailed exploration. The most electrifying possibility isn't just finding intact scrolls. It's decoding their contents without unrolling them. Advances in synchrotron imaging now allow scientists to read carbonized scrolls from Herculaneum by detecting trace metal residues in the ink, a technique that could be applied to waterlogged Alexandrian fragments. A team from Stanford recently proposed using muon tomography, a method that images dense materials by tracking cosmic ray particles, to peer inside the harbor's suspected chambers without disturbing them. If successful, we might one day read Alexandrian text through layers of stone and seawater, as if the library itself were whispering its secrets from the deep. Yet for all the technological promise, the human element remains the wild card. A recently unearthed Byzantine ledger mentions bribes paid to harbor officials in the 7th century to forget certain warehouses. Were these the last guardians of the library's treasures, stashing them in subterranean dockside cellars now submerged by rising sea levels? Or does the truth lie even deeper, perhaps in the labyrinth of underground canals and cisterns that crisscross Alexandria's foundations, some still unexplored? Every storm that churns the harbor sands, every new scan that pierces the gloom, brings us closer to knowing whether the Mediterranean's gentle waves have been cradling history's greatest lost treasures all along, or if they're just another layer in the library's endless game of hide and seek. The Library of Alexandria isn't just a historical tragedy, it's a ghost story, one where the lost texts whisper to us from the edges of history. Think about the weight of what vanished: Aristotle's personal notes, Hypatia's suppressed scientific treatises, Hermes Trismegistus's alchemical secrets, each one a potential key to unlocking forgotten chapters of human thought. The sheer scale of loss is staggering, but what makes it haunting isn't just the absence, it's the lingering possibility that fragments might still surface, waiting in a monastery's hidden alcove or beneath the silt of the Mediterranean. Consider the irony: the library was meant to be the fortress of memory, yet its own story is fractured, filled with gaps we can't bridge. We don't even know how it ended. Was it Caesar's fire, Christian zealots, or slow decay that sealed its fate? The uncertainty itself is a kind of mystery, a reminder that history isn't a neat ledger but a puzzle missing half its pieces. And those gaps tease us with questions. What if the Ptolemy's restricted section held maps to lands beyond the ancient world's imagination? What if Heron's blueprints for steam engines were more advanced than we dare guess? The library's ghosts linger in the margins of our culture. Every time a scholar deciphers a palimpsest or a diver brushes sand from a harbor relic, there's that flicker of hope. Could this be it? The lost dialogue of Plato, the missing volume of Manetho's history. The stakes are higher than nostalgia. These weren't just books, they were alternate paths human knowledge could have taken. Imagine if Eratosthenes' complete star charts had guided Galileo, or if Cleopatra's smuggled Pergamum texts had survived to merge Greek and Egyptian medicine centuries earlier. The ripple effects of what burned could reshape our understanding of everything from astronomy to political philosophy. That's the real obsession, not just what was lost, but what could still be found. Modern tools like spectral imaging and muon tomography are peeling back layers of time, offering glimpses of texts once thought erased forever. The Villa of the Papyri showed us that even fire isn't always the end. Carbonized scrolls can still speak. So who's to say Alexandria's treasures aren't out there, hidden in plain sight? A Vatican vault, an Istanbul basement, or even a collector's private hoard could hold the key. The library's greatest lesson might be this: knowledge is never truly safe. It can be burned, suppressed, or drowned, but it can also slip through the cracks, resurfacing when least expected. So tell us, which of its mysteries keeps you up at night? The vanished plays of Sophocles, the forbidden spells of Thoth, or the quiet hope that somewhere, somehow, a forgotten chest waits to be opened, its contents ready to rewrite history. The story isn't over, it's just waiting for the next clue.